They thought they were dumping a worthless scrap of land on me for $2,900. A dry little patch behind a tennis court with an ugly concrete box humming in the middle of it. What they didn't realize was that the box was the lifeline for an entire neighborhood. And the second I figured that out, the balance of power flipped. My name's Daniel Carter. I'm an electrician from outside Fort Collins, Colorado. When you work around electricity long enough, you start noticing what other people ignore. Breaker panels service lines the sound of a transformer under load, the little forgotten box everything important runs through. Big systems almost always depend on one boring piece nobody respects until it fails. That habit of noticing is the only reason this story happened. About 12 miles east of me sits Willow Creek Estates, one of those polished HOA communities where every roof matches and every lawn looks trimmed with a ruler. The parcel came to me through Leonard Grayson, a former real estate attorney in Denver, with silver hair-pressed shirts and a voice that always sounded like testimony. I'd met him before at the Willow Creek clubhouse. He talked to me the way some men talk to furniture. Polite, dismissive, already certain you don't matter. One evening he called and said the HOA wanted to unload a tiny leftover parcel behind the tennis courts. According to him, it had no real value, just a weird utility strip, 20 by 30 feet, nothing useful. So I drove out. Then I rounded the tennis courts and saw the lot. Dry dirt, cracked clay, scraggly grass, maybe 600 square feet total. Right in the center sat a beige concrete utility box about the size of a refrigerator, humming softly to itself. I walked around it once, then again. That hum bothered me. Not because it was loud, because it was familiar. Leonard came up beside me with a laminated folder and gave me a little chuckle. Well, he said not exactly prime real estate. He handed me the paperwork. Purchase Agreement Parcel Map, HOA approval. Then I saw a second document tucked behind the sale papers. Utility easement, meaning if I bought the land, the HOA would still keep legal rights to whatever sat in that box. Leonard noticed me reading it and smiled. Most people don't worry about that part, he said. It's just boilerplate. Whenever somebody says most people don't read something, that's exactly when I slow down. The easement looked wrong. Rushed. Like somebody had realized too late there was a hole in the paperwork and tried to patch it fast. I looked at the box again, listened to that low electrical hum, then handed the papers back. I'll buy the land, I said, but I'm not signing the easement. His smile stayed, but his eyes tightened. Well, that's kind of part of the deal. Doesn't have to be. He laughed thin and quick, said the box barely did anything, just leftover infrastructure from when the neighborhood was built. I looked at him and said, then it shouldn't matter who owns the dirt under it. 3 days later, the deed was filed. $2,900 cash. And that dry little patch became mine. The next morning, I came back with a flashlight in my tool bag. I shoved the concrete lid aside, leaned over, shined my light inside, and just froze. Because that wasn't some leftover stub of utility hardware. Inside that box was a transformer, a water pressure regulator, a panel of breakers, heavy feeder lines running underground in every direction. The breakers were labeled in black marker, pool clubhouse streetlights, 1 through 3 streetlights, 4 through 6. That box wasn't powering one corner of the property. It was feeding half the neighborhood. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with county records open on my laptop and coffee going cold beside me. Around midnight, I found the original development plans from 2007. Buried in the site documents was a map showing underground utilities transformer node, main distribution point, water regulator, all located exactly where my parcel sat. Then I checked the final filings. No recorded easement. I checked again slower this time. Still nothing. For 18 years, Willow Creek Estates had been running essential shared utilities through a piece of land nobody had legally tied to the HOA. And now that land belonged to me. I called Pete Alvarez, a surveyor who'd worked half the county. 2 days later, he checked the lines, walked the corners, then tapped the concrete box with his boot. No question, he said. Dead center on your parcel. Then I called Rebecca Shaw, a property attorney in Fort Collins. I brought her the photos, the records, the survey. She read through everything, leaned back, and said, Daniel, this is very good for you. She explained it plain. Without a valid easement, the HOA had no permanent legal right to keep critical infrastructure on my land. I wasn't about to touch a wire or shut anything off. That would have been stupid and dangerous. But I absolutely could force a negotiation demand removal or sell the land back at a price that matched the mess they were in. What bothered me wasn't just the mistake, it was Leonard. A real estate attorney doesn't casually miss something like that, which meant he either made one of the dumbest mistakes of his life, or he expected me not to notice. Rebecca sent a certified letter to the HOA board. It said the infrastructure on parcel 417B sat on privately owned land without a recorded easement, and the board had 30 days to remove it or contact us to negotiate access. 3 days later, Leonard called. His voice was tighter now. "You can't seriously expect us to remove those systems," he said. "I don't expect anything," I told him. "I'm the owner. You can remove them or we can negotiate." He started talking about essential services and 120 families. I let him finish, then said, "You sold me the parcel. That's the part that keeps hurting your argument." A week later, I put up an 8-foot steel fence around the lot. Nothing dramatic. Just a clean perimeter, a locked gate, and a small metal sign that read "Private Property Utility Access Available for Lease." I never cut power. Never touched the equipment. But that fence made the truth visible. Every homeowner in Willow Creek suddenly understood that their lights, water pressure pool system, and street lamps ran through a box sitting on land they did not own. 10 days after the letter went out, Leonard showed up at my house in a dusty old Honda instead of his Tesla. Tie loose sweat on his forehead. We walked along the county road and he tried one more time to call me unreasonable. I told him unreasonable was trying to slip a fake easement past a man whose whole job is reading labels and checking connections. Then he said the one thing that told me everything. "You weren't supposed to check the records." He said it quietly, frustrated, like he'd only meant to think it. But there it was. Not a mistake he hoped to fix. A mistake he hoped I'd be too ordinary to catch. After that, the path was obvious. The HOA needed the parcel. Moving that infrastructure would have cost a fortune. So I told him to bring it to the board. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a Willow Creek meeting room across from a crowd of uneasy homeowners. Rebecca sat beside me, calm as ever. Leonard stood near the front, looking smaller than I remembered. When the homeowners realized what that concrete box actually controlled, the room started buzzing. One man in a golf polo called it extortion. Rebecca didn't even blink. "No," she said, "this is property law." Then came the part none of us expected. A woman in the second row, older, calm, raised her hand and looked straight at Leonard. "Before anyone blames Mr. Carter," she said, "I'd like to know how the board sold land with critical utilities on it and never disclosed the legal risk to the homeowners. Up until then, some of them wanted a villain and I was the easiest target. But once she said that out loud, they stopped looking at me and started looking at the board." Rebecca slid over our terms. The HOA would buy the parcel back for $150,000 pay, $18,000 in back rent for years of unauthorized use, cover legal and administrative costs, and send a written explanation to every homeowner about how the mess happened. Then that same older woman said, "Real calm, pay it. The mistake belongs to the board, not to him." That broke the spell. A few minutes later, the vote passed. Unanimous. 30 days after that, a cashier's check for $258,000 cleared my bank account. A week later, the HOA mailed a letter to all 120 homeowners explaining that a parcel containing essential utility infrastructure had not been properly recorded during the original development, and that the matter had been resolved through negotiation. Leonard Grayson resigned from the board the same morning those letters went out. I never saw him again. Life went mostly back to normal after that. I still get up early, still drive the same old truck, still spend my days tracing wires and fixing panels. The money helped, sure. But the part that stuck with me wasn't the check. It was the lesson. People see work, boots, rough hands, a gravel driveway, and they assume the quiet guy won't read the paperwork, won't ask questions, won't understand where the real power sits. But real power usually hides in boring places. A breaker behind a metal panel, a filing buried in county records, an ugly concrete box nobody thinks twice about until everything depends on it. That whole mess taught me something else too. Greed doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles, uses words like reasonable, and slides a document across the table hoping you won't slow down long enough to read it. And justice, when it finally shows up, doesn't always look dramatic either. Sometimes it just opens the box, checks the records, and locks the gate. I've got 2 things framed in my living room now. The deed for that little 20 by 30 parcel I bought for $2,900 and the HOA letter that came after. So let me ask you this. If you were in my boots, would you have done the same thing? Would you have pushed for every dollar and every admission, or would you have quietly sold the land back and walked away? At what point does defending your rights stop being justice and start feeling like revenge? Tell me what you think. Was I fair or did I cross a line? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a shady contractor, somebody who mistook your kindness for weakness, drop your story too, because I'd love to hear how you handled it.